Karoline Leavitt silenced Jasmine Crockett and changed American politics forever. The stage was set in Atlanta, Georgia. It was a cool spring evening, and the city's top media network was hosting a live political debate. The lights glowed with purpose. The audience, lawyers, students, journalists, and party operatives buzzed with anticipation. There was tension in the air, the kind that came before a storm. The topic, leadership and representation in modern Congress. At the center of the stage sat two women. Karoline Leavitt, the poised White House press secretary, known for her unshakable composure, and Jasmine Crockett, a rising political figure and media-savvy commentator who didn't shy from controversy. Both were dressed impeccably, both carried years of public experience, and both knew exactly what this moment could mean. The moderator, a seasoned broadcaster, gave a warm but tight-lipped welcome. "Let's begin." Opening statements were civil. Karoline spoke about the challenges women in leadership face, the double bind of being too quiet or too outspoken. Her voice was calm, even measured. "We carry the pressure of performance before we're even allowed to lead." Then it happened. Jasmine leaned forward, her smile edged with something sharper. "Maybe," she said, voice layered with sarcasm, "if some people stopped playing the victim and actually acted like leaders, we'd get further in this town." The air shifted. A few audience members stirred. The moderator cleared their throat. Karoline didn't flinch. "Honestly, Karoline," Jasmine continued, "people don't take you seriously. And it's not because of your gender. Sorry. It's because you act like the world owes you something. That's not leadership. That's entitlement." Karoline's lips pressed together. Then she raised her eyes. "I don't need anyone to owe me anything," she replied. "I speak for the community that sent me here. If my tone threatens you, maybe it's not my volume, but your comfort, that's the problem." The crowd was silent. It wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. Karoline's voice was steady, but the words landed hard. Even the moderator paused. The debate continued, but the room was no longer listening to policy points. Everyone was watching their interaction. One woman had jabbed. The other had absorbed it and stood taller. Within hours, the clip made its way onto every major platform. TikTok edits paired Karoline's reply with music. Twitter threads dissected tone-timing expression. YouTube commentary shows ran the exchange back to back. Headlines lit up. "Leadership not loud, words have weight." Producers at the network scrambled. PR teams debated damage control. Jasmine's phone lit up with texts. Clarify, reframe, apologize, do something. But Jasmine stood firm. "It was just straight talk," she told her team. "People are too sensitive." Karoline didn't say another word. She didn't need to. She returned to Washington the next morning, walked into her office, and resumed her daily duties like nothing had happened. But something had. Teachers played the clip in high schools. A pastor quoted Karoline in a Sunday sermon. A university in Savannah posted her line above the student union doors. "If my tone threatens you, maybe it's not my volume, but your comfort, that's the problem." The debate wasn't about policy anymore. It had become something cultural, something bigger, and Karoline was now at the center of it. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but it had found her. And Jasmine Crockett, for all her bravado, had underestimated the impact of public judgment, especially when the clip was replayed side by side with old interviews ones, where she openly discussed using provocation as a strategy. Screenshots of internal emails surfaced. Staffers spoke anonymously at first, then publicly. By day 3, Karoline's team had launched a formal review, not a press release, not a tweet, a legal motion. The claim defamation. The request a modest but pointed $3 million in damages. The reason: this isn't about offense, it's about impact. Jasmine called it cancel culture. A political hit job, she said in a recorded Instagram live. But the internet didn't see it that way. They saw a professional woman insulted on live television. They saw another woman laugh about it afterward. They saw emails leaked revealing deliberate provocation. And they saw a lawsuit that wasn't about vengeance, but about standards. One tweet captured the mood. She didn't clap back, she built a case. And as the nation watched, the real story was only just beginning. The legal paperwork was filed quietly, but its ripples traveled loudly. by the following Monday, news of Karoline Leavitt's defamation lawsuit against Jasmine Crockett reached every political desk in the country. Major news outlets confirmed the $3 million claim, citing reputational damage and professional harm. It wasn't just the insult, it was the context, the calculation, and the impact. Karoline's statement was short-issued through her communications director. This is not about suppressing dialogue. It's about restoring the standard of it. The message was simple, but the silence behind it was powerful. She didn't tour the networks. She didn't sit down with morning shows. She returned to her duties, press briefings, policy meetings, community events, as if the lawsuit didn't exist. But it did, and the country was paying attention. Jasmine, on the other hand, wasn't staying silent. She posted twice-a-day videos, screenshots, interviews, framing the lawsuit as an attack on free speech. "If they can sue you for opinions, what's next?" she asked her followers. The clips got views. The comments exploded, but cracks were forming. A former staffer leaked a training memo. In it, Jasmine's team discussed how to destabilize conservative figures with strategic interruptions. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't innocent either. Karoline's legal team, led by veteran litigator Laura Hensley, took note. "This isn't just about words," she told her colleagues. "It's about a documented pattern, and we're going to show it." Laura moved methodically. She gathered deposition requests, pulled archived interviews, subpoenaed Jasmine's former media producer. Everything had to line up. No loopholes, no weak spots. Meanwhile, the public conversation evolved. Pundits debated. Was Karoline thin-skinned or setting a necessary precedent? Was Jasmine reckless or just brutally honest? Morning shows brought in psychologists to discuss the mental toll of public hostility. Civil rights groups published op-eds about tone policing and professional respect. Karoline remained silent, but her silence wasn't absence. It was presence. People were quoting her in boardrooms. Teachers asked students to analyze the debate clip in media literacy classes. Artists began painting her image beside quotes on murals. Her line about comfort versus volume became a cultural reference. Behind the scenes, her team worked overtime. They reviewed every word of her public appearances. They planned no retaliation, no dramatic speeches. Karoline's strategy was clear: rise above, stay steady. Let the courtroom do the talking. But the courtroom wasn't the only arena. Sponsors began quietly stepping back from Jasmine. One fashion brand withdrew a collaboration. A university postponed her scheduled appearance. A podcast host deleted a joint episode without comment. And then came the second leak. A journalist released internal emails from Jasmine's campaign. They revealed a communication strategy encouraging her to go aggressive on camera, especially with female moderates. It disorients them. That line spread fast. Even progressive-leaning outlets began to shift. A well-known political analyst published a column titled, "There's Tough Talk and Then There's Tactics." By the end of the second week, a new narrative emerged. Jasmine wasn't just blunt. She was calculated. And for some, that was the bigger problem. Inside Karoline's camp, the tone shifted. Laura briefed her on public momentum. "They're not just listening, they're aligning." Karoline nodded. "Good. But we're not done yet." Her focus wasn't on Jasmine. It was on the precedent. What message would be left if nothing changed? That night, Karoline held a quiet meeting with young staffers in her district office. She didn't talk about the lawsuit. She asked them one question: how do you think political culture changes? They offered ideas: new leadership, social media reform, stronger ethics rules. She listened. Then she said, it changes when disrespect is no longer ignored, not punished, just no longer ignored. Meanwhile, Jasmine grew defensive. She gave interviews, but they felt more strained. Her smiles looked forced, her tone harsher. She didn't apologize, but began using phrases like taken out of context and misunderstood. Her followers noticed. Some stayed loyal, others drifted. The shift was subtle but visible. Then came the pivotal podcast moment. Jasmine appeared on a late-night YouTube talk show. Halfway through the discussion, the host asked, "Do you regret how you spoke to Karoline?" Jasmine shrugged. Honestly, that's her brand. She plays the victim well. I just said what everyone else was thinking. The host laughed. Jasmine did too. It was a throwaway line, but a staffer from Karoline's legal team clipped it and sent it to Laura. That night, the video reached 5 million views. Karoline still didn't respond publicly, but her team added the podcast clip to their case file, and quietly another domino fell. A respected donor pulled out of Jasmine's future campaign committee. A former mentor posted a cryptic tweet. Sometimes silence is integrity. Sometimes noise is avoidance. Inside Karoline's office, Laura reviewed depositions. Witnesses were lined up: a producer from the debate, 2 former interns from Jasmine's team, and a digital editor who had flagged aggressive PR tactics months before. The lawsuit was no longer a statement. It was a structure, well-built, ready, and the nation was still watching. The walls were beginning to close in, but Jasmine Crockett didn't slow down. She doubled down. The podcast moment where she called Karoline's composure a victim performance had caught fire, not the kind she wanted. But instead of pulling back, she leaned in. "I'm not here to be liked," she told her followers in another stream. "I'm here to speak truth, even when it stings." The problem was, the truth people were now seeing didn't flatter her. The backlash wasn't organized. It didn't arrive in a coordinated campaign. It crept in quietly through canceled invites, dropped contracts, and muted mentions on social media. A production company halted talks about a docuseries on her political rise. A major campaign donor publicly supported Karoline's lawsuit. Worse, people she'd trusted for years began backing away. Her longtime PR agent emailed that she needed a temporary pause to reevaluate. Her fiancé stopped showing up at public events. Friends didn't return texts. The silence was new, and it was deafening. Meanwhile, Karoline's world was anything but quiet, but it wasn't chaotic either. In her Savannah office, her schedule remained full: public Q&As, school visits, veterans forums. She kept her responses sharp and policy-focused, never once mentioning Jasmine by name. She didn't have to. The lawsuit was doing the talking. Laura Hensley had begun depositions. The witnesses were calm, confident. The former media producer from the network testified. The tone of the room changed the moment Jasmine made that comment. "I've never seen anything hit that hard in a studio." An intern from Jasmine's old campaign submitted text messages where Jasmine had previewed her debate strategy. One read, "Going in hot tonight. Let's see how quiet Ms. Palatable stays when I poke the bear." It was damning, and it kept coming. A public interest legal group filed an amicus brief in support of Karoline. They argued the case raised broader questions about speech standards in professional settings, especially for women in public service. Cable news segments shifted tone. What was once framed as a feud now felt like a reckoning. A prominent journalist said, "Karoline's not just suing for defamation. She's suing to define the boundary between disagreement and degradation." Jasmine felt it, the pressure, the shift. She held one final interview with a mid-tier political blog. Halfway through her eyes, tired, she said, "This has gone too far. I made one comment. Now I'm being erased for it." But the internet didn't buy it. Because by now it wasn't about one comment. It was about a pattern, a persona, a strategy unveiled. Karoline's camp stayed focused. Laura drafted the final witness list and began prepping her client for potential testimony. Karoline insisted on doing every prep session herself. "No shortcuts," she said. "If I ask for accountability, I have to model it." Lily, her chief aide, saw the toll it was taking. Long nights, no sleep, endless emails. But Karoline never complained. One night after town hall, Lily asked quietly, "Do you regret filing the lawsuit?" Karoline looked up. "No, I regret not drawing the line sooner." At Spelman College in Atlanta, a professor played the debate clip for her class. The assignment: write about the cost of tone. One student wrote, "Karoline didn't lose control, she took control." In Brunswick, a high school held a panel discussion titled "Respect in Public Dialogue." Karoline's name came up 34 times, though she wasn't in the room. At a fundraiser in Macon, a speaker said, "You don't need to shout to be strong. You just need to mean what you say, like Karoline does." The cultural tide was shifting. Then came a twist no one expected. Jasmine's new legal team brought in to manage mounting pressure. filed a motion to dismiss the case. Their argument her statements were opinion, and thus protected. Laura countered with precision. This isn't just opinion, it's targeted defamation rooted in strategic intent. And we have the documents to prove it. The judge denied Jasmine's motion. The case would proceed to trial. A new wave of media coverage followed. Historic case on professional accountability moves forward, read one headline. Can you say anything in a debate, asked another. Public interest surged. Commentators across the political spectrum weighed in. Some defended Jasmine, citing free expression. Others saw a clear line crossed and praised Karoline's measured stand. And through it all, Karoline said nothing. Not until a high school sent her a hand-painted card with glitter stars and a short message. You make me feel brave. Don't stop. She placed it on her desk, and she didn't. 3 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Karoline sat quietly in her Savannah office, thumbing through a folder of prepared notes. Outside, spring rain streaked down the windows. Inside, everything felt still. Not calm, just still. Across the room, Laura Hensley finished a call with the court clerk. Jury selection starts Monday, she said. Karoline nodded. We're ready. But even as preparations accelerated, something unexpected was brewing. Jasmine Crockett's legal team, now under new leadership after a previous PR disaster, reached out. They were exploring a settlement. Laura didn't blink, put it in writing. 2 hours later, a proposal arrived, 8 figures, a confidentiality clause, and a condition that Jasmine would step back from all public-facing media roles for 2 full years. No podcast, no interviews, no punditry, no apology either. Laura showed Karoline the document. She's not sorry, Karoline said, scanning the pages. No, Laura replied, but she's gone. Karoline stood by the window for a full minute before speaking. We didn't do this for the money. If I sign, it's to move forward, not to let her off easy. You're not, Laura said. This is the end of the road for her version of things. By sunset, the papers were signed. News broke the next morning, not through a dramatic press conference, but a simple email to press outlets. The matter between Reppers Karoline Leavitt and Ms. Jasmine Crockett has been resolved through private settlement. But the silence spoke volumes. Jasmine issued a single sentence through her attorney: I'm choosing to step back from political media and focus on personal reflection. No video, no explanation. For someone who had built a persona on being loud, the quiet was almost louder. Karoline didn't celebrate. She didn't appear on talk shows or issue a victory statement. Instead, she returned to her schedule. She visited schools. She held constituent town halls. She answered policy questions. But something had changed. At a community center in Brunswick, someone asked her how she felt about the resolution. Karoline smiled, not smugly, just honestly. I didn't need a courtroom to prove my worth. I needed the world to see that lines exist, and crossing them has a cost. The crowd rose to its feet. The ripple was immediate. Journalists began quoting Karoline's older speeches. Artists painted murals with her words. A youth group in Augusta started a monthly circle called Lead Like Karoline. High school students submitted essays about dignity and public discourse, citing her lawsuit as a turning point. The cultural shift was tangible. Universities updated their curriculum to include segments on media responsibility and tone in leadership. Church sermons, particularly in the South, began referencing Karoline's case as an example of restraint and principled action. Even corporate workshops took note with slides titled, What Silence Can Say. Karoline received hundreds of letters. A group of third-grade girls from Atlanta mailed handmade bookmarks with the words, Strong, Silent, Smart, written in colored markers. An elderly woman from Charleston sent a pair of earrings writing, These are from the era of women who had to wait to speak. Thank you for not waiting. And Jasmine, she vanished from headlines. Not scrubbed, just gone. Her social media fell quiet. Her podcast page showed under revision. A documentary team pulled their pitch. A publisher delayed a book contract indefinitely. Friends stopped tagging her. Networks stopped calling. Her name didn't trend anymore. Because it wasn't erased. It just no longer echoed. Laura met Karoline one morning and said, You know, this wasn't just a legal win. Karoline looked up. No, it was a cultural mirror. And it was. Because this wasn't about one comment. It was about a line finally held, a standard finally drawn. And the story wasn't ending. It was shifting, because now more people were ready to draw that line too. A month later, at a public university in Georgia, Karoline gave a quiet keynote titled, "The Space Between Words." She didn't mention Jasmine. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke about leadership tone and how power can reside in not answering back. When I chose silence, she said, I wasn't retreating. I was preparing, because sometimes silence isn't passive. It's strategic. It makes space for truth. That speech went viral. A teacher in Florida played it for her civics class. A mayor in Kentucky quoted it in a policy forum. A nonprofit in Chicago made it the theme of their women's leadership conference. Karoline didn't ask for a movement, but one found her. And that was louder than any microphone ever could be. It began subtly, as most cultural shifts do, not with protests or parades, but with whispers, book club discussions, and quiet nods of recognition. Karoline Leavitt hadn't asked for this, but by refusing to shout, she had handed others a model for how to stand. In the weeks following the settlement, it became increasingly clear this wasn't just about a single legal case. It was a message carried in classrooms, boardrooms, community halls. One student at a New York university created a digital archive titled The Karoline Principle, a collection of speeches, articles, and moments from women in politics who chose dignity over drama. It was shared thousands of times. Karoline didn't bask in it. She avoided major interviews, declined primetime specials. She stayed visible but grounded. Her work in Congress resumed without fanfare. She authored a bipartisan bill on media responsibility in public office, something once unthinkable. In a town hall in rural South Carolina, a woman approached with her teenage daughter. "You made my girl believe she doesn't have to get loud to get heard," she said. Karoline shook her hand. "She just has to be clear." Jasmine, meanwhile, was still processing the fallout. Her Atlanta home had become a fortress of silence. Inside her world had shrunk fewer calls, fewer meetings, and more time with thoughts she couldn't escape. At first she tried to reboot, a draft post about resilience, a podcast revival pitch. But every move was met with resistance from her own team. Her new PR advisor was blunt. "You need distance, not defiance." Jasmine hated the phrase, but it was becoming unavoidable. Even progressive allies had gone quiet. Some donors asked not to be named in connection with her previous campaigns. One longtime colleague withdrew from a co-authored book project. The silence wasn't political, it was social. Jasmine, for all her volume, now sat in a vacuum. And the public, they had moved on. They were following the ripple effect. One of Karoline's former interns launched a leadership podcast. Its first episode, "When Silence Stands Taller Than a Shout." Karoline didn't appear on it, but her influence was all over it. A Southern Baptist pastor gave a sermon on tone and truth. "Let your voice be still enough that truth echoes without you," he said, quoting Karoline's Spelman speech. Meanwhile, Karoline remained steadfast. She spent time mentoring young women in public policy, often behind closed doors. In one session, she told a group of high school scholars, "Courage isn't just stepping into a storm. Sometimes it's staying still while one swirls around you." One girl raised her hand. "How do you know when to speak?" Karoline paused. When silence would mean surrender. These weren't lessons taught in political science books. These were lived truths, shaped by fire. A National Journalism Award introduced a new category, responsible public commentary. The inaugural prize went to the Atlanta-based producer who released the unedited debate footage. Karoline sent a handwritten note. "Thank you for keeping it whole." Meanwhile, legal analysts were still unpacking the case. Law schools added it to their curriculum. Debate teams across the country used it as a case study. Some critiqued the settlement's confidentiality. Others called it a triumph of civil ethics. And through it all, Karoline didn't falter. She didn't sway. Her platform didn't balloon overnight, but it deepened. Communities trusted her. Constituents saw her not just as a representative, but as a reflection, and she carried that with her. One late night, Lily found her still in the office. "You don't rest much anymore." Karoline looked up, tired but grounded. "I rest in knowing it meant something." Outside spring had turned to summer. In gardens across Georgia, teachers named sunflowers after her. Book clubs were reading memoirs about dignity and politics, asking each other what would Karoline do. The movement hadn't needed noise. It just needed a moment to recognize what was always possible. In Washington, D.C., a closed-door strategy meeting was held among several progressive leaders. One advisor brought up Karoline's case as a pivot point. "We have to rethink our approach to discourse," she said. "Respect isn't a weakness. It's a strength we've overlooked." Corporate leaders took notice too. A tech company in San Francisco began offering leadership workshops inspired by the principles in Karoline's public addresses. Their slogan, "Clarity over Chaos." In Birmingham, a librarian curated a display titled "Modern Icons of Integrity." Karoline's face stood beside names like John Lewis and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It wasn't exaggeration, it was resonance. Meanwhile, Jasmine's world grew dimmer. Behind closed doors, her team discussed quiet exits, fading from public view. A major brand that once considered her for a media partnership sent an official withdrawal letter. "We are refocusing on voices aligned with constructive public leadership." Jasmine read it 3 times. The words didn't sting. They confirmed what she'd begun to suspect: the wind had shifted, and she was on the wrong side. A former university professor emailed her privately. "You had a chance to reset the conversation. Instead, you played to the crowd, and they stopped clapping." But even in her silence, Karoline was growing louder in the way that mattered most. Without shouting, without spectacle, she spoke at a symposium in North Carolina on restorative political discourse. Her words weren't revolutionary. They were reasonable, and that's what made them radical in a noisy age. Power, she said, isn't just about position, it's about presence. And presence isn't volume, it's gravity. When you show up for others without diminishing yourself, you change the terms of the conversation. The audience, full of students, local officials, and educators, stood to their feet. Not because it was trendy, but because it was time. And as Karoline walked into a community meeting in Macon, a young boy ran up holding a notebook. "Will you sign this?" She did. "What should I write?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Something about standing tall." Karoline smiled. She wrote, "Tall doesn't mean loud. It means certain, stay certain," and walked into the room where a future was still being shaped not by headlines, but by the people listening now. In the months after the Quiet Revolution, Karoline Leavitt helped spark the noise surrounding the case had faded, but its influence remained everywhere. Across the country, local councils began adopting new codes of conduct, citing her as a catalyst. School districts introduced modules on civic dialogue using clips of her congressional remarks and Spelman speech. Karoline stayed steady, never seeking the spotlight, but never shying from responsibility. Her days remained filled with bills, town halls, and mentoring. She declined a book deal and a streaming documentary, choosing instead to support a new nonprofit focused on ethical leadership for young women. She visited a classroom in Savannah one morning, where students had crafted posters of her quotes. One read, "Silence is not surrender, it's strategy." Another, "Grace can be louder than rage." Jasmine Crockett, now largely out of public life, issued a single op-ed months later. It was measured: no excuses, no rebuttals. Just a reflection: I confused visibility with value. I spoke loudly but not wisely, and that silence I once mocked taught me more than applause ever did. It was shared modestly without fanfare. Karoline didn't comment publicly. She didn't need to. By autumn, a national civic engagement conference added her name to their keynote list, not as a politician, but as a standard bearer. She began her speech simply, "I didn't plan for this moment. I just refused to let it pass without meaning." The crowd, a mix of students, teachers, and leaders, stood in quiet recognition, not of celebrity but of character. In a world saturated with noise, Karoline Leavitt didn't win because she shouted louder. She won because she didn't flinch, didn't retaliate, and didn't let go of what mattered. That steadiness, not outrage, became the new benchmark. And long after the headlines faded, her story lived on, not in spectacle but in example. Quiet, unwavering, and clear. The kind of clarity that doesn't just change conversations, it changes culture.